In fact, we are talking about asynchronous events now, right? So in asynchronous, we have talked about two things. We have talked about future method. Future method is something which gets executed in the future when the resources become available, and then queuable effects. Okay, queuable effects is also an effects code which gets executed in the future. But the difference between queuable effects and future method is that this is just a method and this is a class, right, which implements the queuable context. And second thing, you put this in the Apex job queue. You have the option of putting queuable effects in the Apex job queue. As a result, your you are able to monitor the progress of it, which does not happen with the future method. But in queuable effects, you have the option of monitoring the progress. So what is the status, right? So queuable effects we have talked about. Now we are going to talk about another type of asynchronous effects, which is schedulable effects. Okay, schedulable effects, as the name says, schedulable, it can be scheduled. So like queuable effects is, it will be put on the queue, right? When you call this effects using that system.enqueue job method that we used the other day, it gets scheduled, it gets in the queue, right? This one, queuable effects. Okay, but you may have some effects code which you might want to schedule. When I say, I mean, let's say there's an Apex code that you want to run every Friday, or there's an Apex code that you want to run every month, right? So how do you do that? Here in queuable Apex, still you have to call that method system.enqueue job to put the Apex code in the queue. So let's say if I have a code which I want to run every Friday, I'll need to go and call that system.enqueue job method every Friday manually, right? But sometimes you might not want to do that. You just have some Apex code and you want the Apex code to run automatically in the backend. In that case, you can use schedulable Apex. So schedulable Apex makes sense if it's a repeat activity and there's a certain frequency defined to it. Queuable Apex, you will define a code as queuable Apex if it's a one-time activity. Okay, and there is no defined frequency for it. So if, you just want to call it manually, then queuable Apex is a good thing. Ultimately, the processing is going to happen the same way. It's going to go into the job queue and it will get processed when the resources become available. So both of them are asynchronous, and for both the processing is going to happen the same way. The difference is queuable Apex you have to call, schedulable Apex is something which can be scheduled. You will have a defined frequency, and based on that frequency it's going to execute automatically. Right. So for example, in a schedulable Apex, if you define schedule to be every Friday, okay, you define the schedule to be every Friday, then what will happen? This schedulable Apex will get into the job queue every Friday automatically, so you don't have to do anything. All right. Now, how do you write schedulable Apex? It's very simple. If you remember the way you have written queuable Apex, schedulable Apex is exactly the same way. Just that the interface that it implements is different. So how did we write the queuable Apex? Public class subname to the class implements queuable. And inside this we talked about a void method, public void execute. Right. This is the syntax of your queuable apex. Schedulable apex is exactly similar, just that instead of queuable you will be using the schedulable interface. That's it. That's the only difference. Class play schedulable. And then the method name is going to be execute only, and here it's going to be schedulable context. Okay, that's it. Now this code is ready to be scheduled. Okay, this can be scheduled because you have defined schedulable context here. Let me quickly go to Salesforce and write a code and show it to you. Okay, so let's go and create a new class. The same way you just have to go ahead and create a class. Sorry. Alright. So your schedulable apex is ready. All that you have to do is you have called the schedulable interface here. Now, what happens when you call an schedulable interface here? Once you've called the schedulable interface, you are able to schedule this apex class. Okay, and where do you go and schedule it? You just have to go to apex classes and you have, where you see the list of Apex classes, there you have at the top, right, schedule Apex. This option is available, right? So what you can do is you can just click on this, and from here you can schedule the Apex. So you don't have to call it. In Queuable Apex, you manually had to call it. Here you just have to go and define the schedule for it. So you just go to, click on the Apex classes, you will get onto the list of the Apex classes, and there you can click on schedule Apex. That's it. Just give a name for the job, whatever you want to call it. Okay, which class do you want to schedule? Select only the classes where you have implemented the schedulable interface. Those classes will be available here. Quite logical, right? So only the classes where you have implemented that schedulable interface, those will be available. So currently I just have one class which has schedulable interface. So this class is available. Just select this. Okay, you want a weekly or a monthly frequency, you have the option. You can make it daily also by selecting all of them. But let's say I just want this to get executed on Friday. Okay, and then you have the option of defining the start date and end date for the schedule, till when it should continue, and then the preferred start time. What time do you want the execution of the code to start? Now, the start time that you are selecting here is just an indicative start time. So basically this is the time that your Apex code will get into the job queue, right? And after that it depends on the job queue, how much if there are some other Apex code which need to be executed, if the resources are available or not. So it depends on that fact. See, exact start time will depend on job queue activity, as you can read here. Right, so this is also asynchronous Apex, so it's not that exactly if you say let's say 7 a.m. here, it's not going to be exactly 7 a.m. execution, but 7 a.m. is the time when this will get into the job queue, and if there is nothing else, this will get executed. If something else is actually getting executed, some synchronous Apex is getting executed, this will wait in the job queue. Alright, then just click on save. Done. Okay, now your Apex has been scheduled. How do you monitor it? You can monitor it in the scheduled jobs. See weekly Apex. Next scheduled run is on 1st of April, right? Submitted on 27th March. So this is where you can actually come and check the scheduled Apex, and apart from this, each job can be tracked in the job queue as well, the Apex job queue. Each execution will be a job there, right? See, scheduled Apex queue. Okay. So you can see the next execution of the scheduled Apex in the Apex job queue as well, and then schedule can be seen in scheduled Apex as well. So you can look at it from here or from here. Right. So that's about the schedulable Apex. We just put in the schedule to your Apex code, right? Which is pretty simple as well. Now the other thing. Okay, before I move into the other part, do we have any questions or doubts here for the schedulable Apex? A batch Apex. Batch epics is again another way of asynchronous epics. And this is again some important concept. Okay, so let's understand what's batch epics. A developer can now employ batch epics to build complex long-running processes that run on thousands of records on the Force.com platform. Okay, so batch epics comes into picture if you are actually dealing with thousands of records and you want to process them in one method, right? What does batch epics do? Batch epics operates over small batches of records covering your entire record set and breaking the processing down to manageable chunks, right? So what batch epics will do? Batch epics is gonna break your big database into small data chunks which can be processed, right? So that's what a batch epics does. For example, data cleansing operation that goes through all accounts and opportunities. So if there is an operation that you want to perform in all accounts and all opportunities on a nightly basis and update them if necessary based on custom criteria. Right. So if there is some sort of criteria where you just want to perform a data cleansing activity on a regular daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a one-time basis, it just that depends on you. But if you want to process all the records, there can be thousands of records which you have in the database, and for processing all of them, you need batch epics. So it's more like if you have a big set of data which needs to be processed, instead of processing the big set of data at once, you just process small batches out of it. This way, right? So take small set of records and process them at once. So that's what batch epics is used for. The Salesforce, we are actually going to get into in our coming sessions. We are going to talk about certain limitations that Salesforce will put on you, right? So you cannot do whatever you want. So if you just want to, go ahead, fetch 100,000 record or a million record and process them at once, you cannot do that, right? So Salesforce does not allow you to do that. So for that reason, because you have certain limitations, so you cannot say that, okay, fine, I'm just gonna pick a million record and process all of them at once. It will not work. The operation will fail, right? So in that case, you primarily will have to depend on the batch effects. All right. So anytime you have more than 10,000 records, or if you feel that your operation might contain more than 10,000 records, you should take help of batch effects, right? So that's a better way of doing things, because more than if you are anticipating more than 10,000 records, let's say 20, 50,000 records in the processing, then using batch effects is a better thing to do, right? Okay. So what do we do in the batch effects? It's very simple. So Salesforce will basically, you will define the data set that needs to be processed, and Salesforce will break that into batches and then process them one by one. So while you're writing a batch effects, first thing that you have to do is you have to implement batchable interface here. This is database.batchable interface. Okay. Now, Inside this class, batchable, inside the class which implements the batchable interface, database.batchable interface, you have to define three methods. One is going to be the start method, one is going to be the execute, and one is going to be the finish. Okay. So in Schedulable and Schedulable, we saw that we just had one method, execute. Here we have three: start, execute, finish. Start basically breaks data set into batches. Execute will do execution of code in batches. So start method is actually preparing the batches. Okay, then execute is where you write the code what you want to execute, whatever you want to perform. So that execution will be done on each batch one by one. Finish, anything you want to do once all batches have been processed. Right. So execute is basically the execution of batches one by one. All right. And now this once execution has completed for all the batches, which we have created in start, once the execution is completed for all of them, then it is the finish method which will get executed. Right. But finish method you can just keep it blank also if you don't want to do anything. So in finish method you can just say update a record or maybe send an email. So this is just again an indication that all your batches have got processed. Now what you want to do next? So in case you want to put something in the finish method, you can put, otherwise you can just leave it blank also. But start and execute method we have to define. Alright. So we will be writing the batch apex. Okay. So where do you write batch apex? Again the same, create a class and write the batch apex. Finish is also a void method. first thing that I've done, I have basically included three methods here, right? So in these three methods, um, this is a void method, execute is a void method. That's what we have seen in schedulable and queuable. So the same way here also execute is going to be a void method. And similarly, this finish method is also a void method, which means it does not return anything. This also doesn't return anything. This also doesn't return anything. But start method cannot be a void method. Why? Because it has to create the batches and it has to pass on the batches. Right? It has to take the query basically for the set of records that you want to process, right? So it should take the query and break it into batches, right? So this is where you are going to supply the query, which records you want to process, and this database.query locator is going to actually return this data type. Basically means the batches created out of the query. Okay, so this database.getQuery locator is gonna take the query, break it into batches, and that's the reason why I have defined the return type here as database.query locator. Okay, so it's a custom data type or return type. So that's what it is, right? So we just don't have to do anything. We just have to create the start method. The start method is not a void method. Start method should have database.query locator as the return type, and then we call this method database.getQuery locator and we supply the query. So whatever your query is. So this query should include all the records that you want to process, and then it will automatically break those into manageable batches. So you don't have to worry about that part. Now, once that batches are done, now execute is the part where the actual execution will take place. All right. So the actual execution of records is going to take place here. Okay. So the batch that I receive from here, the batch of records which I receive from here, so I'm taking them, taking that as the scope or list of s object, and I'm calling it scope. Okay, so this is just a parameter to receive the value from here, because this method needs to receive the value from the previous method. Okay, and you can, it's just a parameter, so you can give it a certain name, and then I need to process those records. Okay, so for s object, let's say I want to process a count. Again, whatever processing you basically want to do, you can do that. You can process it. Okay, let's okay. Let's say we just want to take out all the accounts, and we are going to update the description field for all the accounts. Okay. You can actually do it this way also. You can just say a dot description equals something, right? And then update a. So this will also work. So it is actually going to take account and going to update the description field for the account, right? But the problem with this code will be that this is, there is, it's too much hard coded. Too much hard coded. When I say which field you are updating, that is also mentioned here, and what you want to update, that's also mentioned here, right? I want the user to decide on at that point of time execution which field he wants to update and what value he wants to give, right? So for that reason, what we are going to do, we are just going to make this code a little more flexible for the end user. So let me call a string field string query string value. Okay, I've defined 3 strings because I'm saying that I just want these values to be variables. Which record needs to be processed, that's a variable. Which field needs to be processed, that's also a variable. And what value needs to be updated to that field, that's also a variable. Right. So I'm just gonna define these 3 strings. Okay, and since we need to take these values from the end user, define a constructor which can take the values string f string q string z. Field equals f query equals q value equals v. Okay. So here instead of typing in the query, you could have actually typed the query here like this. Select something. But instead of typing the query, I am using the variable query. Field value. Okay. Right. So what I've done, I've used a put method. Put method will basically pick the field and assign the value to that field. So this field, value, all these things are to be supplied by the user. Right. So I think I am okay to save this code. Let me see if it gives some error or something. Semicolon, line number 19. Line number 19. Okay. Yes. Semicolon is required. Unexpected token finish. Line number 24. So the code is ready, right? So what we have done, we have defined 3 variables and then we have defined a constructor which has 3 parameters. So these 3 parameters will be taken at the time of executing this batch apex. Okay, so the person who is trying to run the batch apex should pass the values to these 3. These 3 parameter values are passed on to these 3 variables here, and then these 3 variable values are used in the code. Query is used in the query section, and then it is used in the updating of record. Okay, so now if you want to update description for all the accounts, so your field value should be description, query should be select all accounts or whatever, select name description from accounts, and value should be whatever value you want to assign to the description. Alright, so my code is ready. All that I have to do is I just have to go ahead and call this batch apex. How do you call the batch apex? There's another method called database dot execute batch. Okay, this database dot execute batch should call the batch apex. You can just put in your class name and then you should pass on the parameters also here. So FQV. Okay, so this code, if you execute, this is gonna pass on the so this is gonna work for you, right? But before that we have to supply the value for f, q and v, right? So I should just say string f equals description string q equals select name from account and string v equals uh, updated using batch, right? So it's gonna take all the accounts, so name and description. So this query is going to take all the accounts, name and description from all the accounts. Field is description, the field which needs to be updated, and the value that you want to update to is this, right? So I'm passing on these values. Yes. So if I execute this bit, should ideally do the job. Let's see. So we can execute this from anonymous code block. Let me go to developer console and go to the anonymous code block. Okay, the code got executed successfully. Now let me go and see in the Apex job queue. Batch Apex completed, total one batch, because we don't have too many records here, so just processed one record, one batch. Let me go and see if the record actually got updated. Just pick any account. Yes. See, description of any account should have got updated to updated using batch. That's what we put as value, update using batch. See. So it should have ideally updated the description of all the accounts. You pick any account, pick Express Logistics. Okay, description of all the records are got updated. Right? So that's how it works. Now let me know if anyone has any question or doubt here for the batch Apex.